Resolution mechanics can really make or break the feeling behind a game. So let's take a look at some tweaking that I've been doing to see if I can get something to better fit a game that I'm in the middle of creating today. So, some of you may know about Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was a pretty prominent U.S. statesman, particularly involved in foreign policy and national security. Acted previously as the Secretary of State of the United States and also the National Security Advisor during particularly Johnson, and then going into Nixon. Heavily involved, Henry Kissinger was in, for example, escalating Vietnam, the bombing campaigns in Cambodia, his involvement as either the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor on setting U.S. policy in Central and South America during the sort of 60s and 70s. But yeah, there's a very long list of of very negative world history things that can be placed at Henry Kissinger's feet. He recently died, and somebody decided to start a Henry Kissinger is dead jam. Not necessarily celebrating the fact that he was dead, of course. Someone dying, that's never a good thing. But because of his massive reputation, it's because of bringing China and the United States a bit close together and stuff like that. He has a reputation. So lots of people were praising him when he, shortly after his death. And this is more just a reminder of, Henry Kissinger was not a very good person. Supported a lot of really nasty stuff that the United States had gotten directly involved in many ways, either because of policies that he helped create or because of policies that he continued. Predatory States is in many ways a game that is inspired by that. That sort of the history, mainly focusing on especially the Central and South America, U.S. involvement in Central and South America in the mid to late 60s going into the 70s, especially when we're looking at like the Southern Cone area. So, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil, particularly those countries in particular. You're playing regular people. And as a result of playing regular people, I felt that it was important to be able to essentially create any type of person that you wanted. The people getting involved in things like resistance movements or just social activism movements, speaking out against the government of many of these different places where stuff like this were happening. Many of them were regular everyday people who just happened to have the courage or the didn't have anything left to lose to speak out and stuff like that. So I wanted you to be able to kind of create as a player any type of person that you wanted, whether that's the local street mechanic who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and got swept up, or happened to be in the right place at the right time, depending upon your point of view, and kind of got swept up into things. Or maybe you're a university student who's gotten involved in a political activist group. Maybe you're an active guerrilla. And you're actually militarily resisting the government, or have aspirations to do so. It could be any number of things. So in order to allow that, one of the things that I wanted to utilize was the Blossom system that I had previously created. For those of you who might not be aware of what the Blossom system is, basically it's, as you can see here, it's essentially like a style of Venn diagram, where around the outside, there are, words or phrases or short sentences that describe aspects of your character. These aspects are key elements of your character's identity. things that you have sort of incorporated or accepted into your personality, into your own self, and that has in turn influenced the things that you know about, the things that you're good at doing, and stuff like that. These aspects then overlap and create the character's skills. And of course, these skills, again, these are areas where, things have overlapped so that you've become incredibly practiced or incredibly knowledgeable about certain specific areas because of these hobbies or past events or different identities that you've taken up, professions that you've had in the past or currently practice, stuff like that. When I was originally looking at dice mechanics to potentially branch into for this type of game, I wanted this game to be able to be played as a group, but also to be potentially able to be played as a solo individual. And of course, one game system that is really good at doing that is Ironsworn. Another thing that kind of drawn me to Ironsworn is the fact that it utilizes opposed roles. I had previously utilized an opposed role style system when I was doing some modifications to Sakuk Roleplay in Joseon, where I had taken basically the breathless dice system, and there's a difficulty level between 1 and 5, where 1 you'd be rolling a d4 and 5 you'd be rolling a d12, and then you just kind of roll the dice against each other, and whoever gets the higher number wins. In many ways, Ironsworn has that basic concept where you are, as you can see above me there, you have an action die, which creates your action score. So basically you roll a d6, you add together the stat that applies with your, to this particular role for your character, move, because of course this is, Ironsworn is roughly based off of the ideas of the Powered by the Apocalypse system, so it does have moves. So yeah, you would roll the stat associated with the move. Anything that you're adding to it would also go there, and then that creates your action score. And then that action score is being put up against 2 d10s. And basically the idea is that if your action score is below the challenge dice, both of them, independently, not added together, but if your action score is below both of the challenge dice, then you miss. You have failed. There's a dramatic turn of events. Something, basically, whatever you wanted to do is not going to end up happening unless you make a really major sacrifice. In the example you see above me, the action score is 6, and then we have a 4 and a 6 on the challenge dice. So in this case, only one of the die is successful. In this case, you'd be getting a weak hit, which is kind of basically a success with consequence, where you can succeed, but you're not going to be as successful as you initially envisioned, or there's going to be at least a minor cost applied to being successful. And again, there's this kind of idea that you're starting to lose control of the situation. You're not fully able to act independently and completely, fully in this situation. You're having to, at least to a certain extent, react to what's happening as opposed to proactively acting in this situation. If your action score is above both of the challenge dice, then that's a strong hit. You're fully successful. You're being very proactive in your actions. You are fully in control of the situation, and you are going to continue to remain in control moving forward pretty significantly in what's occurring in the situation. Now, this is good, but there are 2 problems. One problem is, of course, the fact that in the system I was just discussing with the Blossom system, whether or not an action you're doing applies under an aspect or under a skill or neither of the above, that would influence what type of die you're rolling or how many dice you're rolling. And of course, that doesn't really work with this particular setup because you're adding a stat. The second problem is that I didn't really like these odds. As you can see here, this is the odds of getting a strong hit, or the values, various values you might get if you're attempting to get a strong hit or a weak hit. The black line that you see above me, that sort of pyramidal, off-center pyramid, that is the odds of the action dice, that 1d6 being at least higher than one of the d10s. So you can see, and also by the percentage next to me, you can see that it is a little over 50%. So you do have a little over a 50% chance of at least getting a partial success, basically. But the strong hit, you only have a 15% chance of getting a success. And that's okay. But the problem is, of course, if we're just adding raw numbers, all we're doing is taking these two sort of weird pyramidal shapes and shifting them to the left or the right, depending upon whether we're adding or subtracting from the action pool. And I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of that. And also, again, these odds are under the assumption that it's not beat, it's meet or beat. Basically, my theory is that if my action roll is the same or better than the dice, while the actual rolls for Ironsworn are actually, it has to be more. So the odds in Ironsworn are actually even worse than this. Which, I mean, our characters are supposed to be sort of normal, everyday people, but I also didn't want to make it absolutely miserable for our players. So I wanted to try to experiment with the idea that instead of your stat just adding and shifting that number over, instead I wanted to make it so that it's actually changing the die that you roll. So here you can see on the screen the odds of getting a weak hit or a strong hit, and this is assuming that if no aspect or skill that your character has applies, you would be rolling a d6. If an aspect applies, then you would roll a d8. And if a skill applies, you'd roll a d12. Now, the reason why I'm using a d12 instead of a d10 is because, at least in my feeling, I feel that the d10 is not quite big enough of a step. I feel like that if the skill's really applying, then you know it should be a more significant it should be a more significant upgrade over the D8. So that's why typically I avoid using D10s. Also, there's also the fact that the challenge dice are D10s, and I didn't want players to get confused as to, like, I have 3 D10s, which one is mine and which 2 go for the challenge dice. I didn't want that problem to occur. So D10s are exclusively for challenges, and the 6, 8, and 12 are for other stuff. So as you can see, you know, the weak hit, we go from about a 55, as I mentioned in the last slide, to about a 76 with the D12. For a strong hit, we go between 15 to 49. So again, we're even without extra modifiers, we're still not quite at 50% of getting a strong hit, which I felt was appropriate. Now, of course, this leads to the problem of what do we do about adds or modifiers? In Ironsworn, again, adds are also just, well, adding, right? Just like with the stat. Again, this isn't very interesting. It also doesn't really necessarily feel that appropriate, especially considering we're adjusting the size of the original die. I also wanted to introduce an element of randomness. Again, even if you're trying super hard, sometimes you're not going to be successful. So it also felt like there should be an element of randomness in there for the mods as well as for the actual action die. Also, I just feel that sometimes you want more clickety-clack in your game. You know, adding an extra or a bigger die just has a bit more of a tangible feeling to it than just, you know, tossing out another just adding 3. It just seems to feel better to me. So I also wanted to have this be dice as well. So as a result, basically the idea is that mods would be would basically every time something is adding to a dice roll, you again would be rolling a die. This time you'd be adding a D2 for the initial mod. If basically the equivalent of a +1 in Ironsworn would be a D2 in this system. +2 would be a D4. +3 would be a D6. And then +4 would actually be a 2D4 instead of like a 1D8. Again, I don't want I want more randomness, but I don't necessarily want to make it too extreme. But I don't want to end up punishing players who are investing a whole bunch of resources and points and things into a roll, and then they end up with like a 1 if they put 4 points into it, and that doesn't seem very fair. For 3 points, even then it's a bit but I'm okay with that. So you can see the actual statistic arches here. Again, this is assuming this is for a hard hit with a D6. So again, this would be if your player was basically, this is like the most baseline of baseline rolls, because no skill or aspects are applying from your character. And also we're basically just investing outside resources. With all of these dice rolls, how do we avoid overpowering things? We're trying to create a game about everyday normal people, not superheroes. So how do we avoid this? Well, the first thing is I was definitely intending on including limited use items. I'm using the example of Breathless, where the more you use them up, the weaker they get until the point where you can't use them anymore, at least when it comes to certain resources, while other resources can be recharged. This, in many ways, is kind of similar to the way assets work in Ironsworn, at least from my understanding of it. Another thing I was thinking about doing was to limit how often people are solely relying on their skills, just so they get those big dice every single time. Was either making a modification to the momentum system that exists in Ironsworn to try to maybe whenever you're utilizing a skill, you have a choice of rolling that D12, or you could bump it down to a D8, or you could bump it down to a D6 even, if it's a roll that's not really that important, you don't really care about. And either using a modification of the momentum system, where maybe it's deducting some momentum whenever you decide to use that skill at that higher level, or use an aspect at that higher level, or maybe having just a resource pool like effort. This would not only avoid characters depending too heavily on their advanced skills, but also would avoid the group of players depending too much on an individual player at the table. So that might be another way to do it, but I haven't decided on that specific. That's something I'm going to continue working on. So thank you all for joining us on this little discussion of this game that I've been throwing together called Predatory States. The jam that this is for, which I will put a link down below for the jam that this game is being made for, does technically end at the end of the year, or the very beginning of next year. I don't remember the specific date. I'll put it up on the screen right now. But it's going to be soon. So I will do my best to try to make sure that the game is done by the deadline, but I'm not making any guarantees. Obviously, whenever you tinker with systems, this does definitely help when it comes to trying to create a certain feeling or a theme. So for example, I'm intending on potentially utilizing this system for another politically related game that's going to be coming out later, called part-time professions, which in which case you are going to be playing a normal person who gets thrown into a political position on an assembly and having to make political decisions. But in that case, the dice, instead, the modifiers, instead of being added before you roll, are actually going to be added after your initial roll, to sort of reflect the general negotiation that occurs as a result of trying to pass a law or make political decisions or stuff like that. So yeah, that's something that I've definitely been toying around with. That would be a different way to utilize the same system. But yeah, anyway, if the game does come out at the end of January, or sorry, at the end of December, I will definitely put a link for the game once it's live below. So if you are watching this video in January or February or whenever, there's a decent chance that there is a link down below for this game. But in any case, thank you all for joining us in here today on Hessens County for another TTRPG talk. Definitely stay tuned on the off chance of this game managing to cross the finish line, and have a good zone.